Great. So hi, everyone. My name is Anya Avendano. I am Public Relations Manager for Upsilon Phi Delta and Healthcare Administration Student Forum. You've probably seen me around in meetings or classes before. And today's workshop is going to be about Canva and PowerPoint. It's mainly about how to make an effective presentation, how to use all of these free resources, and just kind of impress whoever you're presenting to. If you haven't done so already, please go ahead and use the sign-in form. We'll be putting it in throughout the chat in case you forget. So without further ado, let me get started here. So what I'm currently on is Canva, and Canva is a free website. You can make an account. Oh, this will be going off during chat, so I will apologize for that. You can make a free account, and it's a really great website if you want to use any elements for your text. So kind of these decorative pieces you don't find a lot on PowerPoint. And I feel like a lot of people always ask, well, I need to use PowerPoint. So what I always suggest is to make a Canva account, and you can always go through templates. See, I got some inspiration from this one. You can go through templates if you're not sure how to make your own. And there's a really dandy thing that you can do. And if you come over here and press share, you can go down here to more, and it'll export it as a Microsoft PowerPoint. So once you do that, we're going to go over to I'm going to share my screen again. It'll export everything as a PowerPoint. And it's really useful, I think, to get those elemental texts in. If you want to just export a template without changing anything, that really helps because then you have slides that are already pre-done. And having pre-done slides means that you can keep consistency and kind of efficiency when you're creating a presentation. Maybe you're short on time. So I know that was really short on the Canva point. I would love to go through more, but I do want to get a lot of elemental and basic visual design elements done with you guys so you can kind of understand how to effectively give information. So I will play this. Okay, so first thing is we're going to be looking at visual hierarchy. Now you may be wondering, what is visual hierarchy? Visual hierarchy is what I would like to call your basic flow of a presentation. It's going to say what you're establishing, where your eyes are first pointing at. So for example, if anybody wants to come off mute or type in the chat, what is the first thing you kind of focus on the slide? Right. The color. Okay, great. Yeah, that's a really big popping point. It's going to draw your eyes to the color and then probably draw your eyes over to this elemental thing. And then you'll naturally go over here. So that actually brings me to my next point. We're going to be going over the Z pattern. So the Z pattern is what I would like to call a singular purpose pattern. It's when you have maybe a really heavy image, you're going to be really dense up here, and then you'll have information explaining it. Now, when you do a headline, you're going to want something that contrasts from the rest of the body. So it may be a different font, a different color, bolded, italicized, whatever it be. And Z patterns are a really great way to just get that front pulled. So this would be one of your first slides in a presentation. Now, if you go over, there's the F pattern, which may be a little bit more informationally dense, with less photos, less things to catch your eye. So headline, the same thing. You're going to have that one elemental point that's different. And then you're going to have information kind of going forward. It's going to be dragging your eyes how you naturally kind of read. You're going to be going left to right, then you're going to be going down, etc. Is all of this making sense so far? Everyone doing good? Cool. Okay, so going forward, we're going to go over basic visual hierarchy basics. First, we'll be going over repetition and rule of thirds. These are going to be different elemental designs that make sure that you're consistent with all of your presentation. Proximity and leading lines. Again, this is going to be how close everything is. Is it looking clean? Is it looking neat? Where are your eyes leading? Size, scale, and alignment. Kind of, we'll go over this more in depth, but kind of how we're seeing right now, the size and scale are remaining exact. They're kind of aligned with one another. It's being very clean. You can get the point across well. And then negative space and perspective. So for repetition, when you're doing a presentation, sometimes you're going to want elemental patterns that are all of the same. And you may think, why is this a bad thing? Why do I not want this one to contrast? Visually, you have much better tools to contrast in a different way than making this a random shape, because then it breaks the guide of the actual element. So when I say that, if you had 4 squares, it looks very clean. It's a boxy pattern. When you have something very rounded, it's bubbly, it's a little brighter, it's happier. So breaking that pattern kind of throws off whatever, I guess, vibe you're looking for. So then you have proximity. Proximity is how close everything is in relation to one another. If you have proximity that's close, it's going to look very cluttered and messy. And the thing about presentation specifically is that you're trying to get information across in a way that's concise, and kind of keeping it clean. We're all in healthcare, so we want to have something that doesn't make people feel kind of confused. It's bombarding, overwhelming in any way. Size and scale. This is another way that you can contrast. That's a better visual image. So for example, if you have something that's smaller and something that's bigger, you are obviously drawn to the small thing, and then you may go, what's over here? But for this, size and scale, I shouldn't say that it's particularly not something to do. It's not a do not. It's more of a, this is for contrastual elements. If you have 2 photos that you want to look at the same time, and maybe this is like a before and an after, that's going to be visually okay. But if you want to have more focus on something here, these are going to be more support focuses, and it's going to give a lot more information in a smaller amount of space. So negative space. Negative space ensures that you're not overcrowding your presentation. So when you're doing PowerPoints, a lot of people tend to really cram in all of their information into different areas. And I understand that sometimes professors are like, hey, I want you to have a minimum or a maximum. And with that being said, there are ways to condense information that aren't overly crowded. Just make sure you're very consistent. So like this area, I could have done better because it's not in the same proximity as it is up and down. Technically it is, but it doesn't visually look that way because there's less space here, but it's all even in the middle, down here. That's all going to be negative space. Nothing is too close together. And while you're doing PowerPoints, there are these things called guidelines that will tell you. So if you move an element, I went back. If you move an element, should be something that says maybe it's like 30 and 30. And what that means is that it's 30 pixels away from the top and the bottom of another element. So that's kind of one way that you can naturally keep things aligned, keep things clean. Rules of thirds. This is more for artistical purposes, but it can help with the asymmetry of a presentation. I have a lot of visually dense information over here, but with rules of thirds, you can see that it's kind of over here. So this one is more half and half, but you would prefer not to have everything so one-sided and then leave so much space over here, kind of how this one does. So if you had most of your information, so like there's information up here, information kind of here, information here. We're playing with rules of thirds. There's 3 that are kind of leading. But if I had it where this was moved away and maybe this one was moved closer over here, it's going to be a lot heavier on one side. Oh, I see the chat. Okay, perfect. Thank you, T. So going on to leading lines. Leading lines are really simple. If you're going for kind of a lot of visually dense information, you may have a tendency to bubble things. But the thing about leading lines is that you're keeping it clean. You're keeping it very focused on one element. You're not kind of putting things around in any which way. So for example, leading lines kind of goes here, we go down. It's again like the F pattern. We have our format, we have our information. You just kind of go down in an order. For alignment, this one I would say is one of the only ones that I would implore you all to keep consistent. There's not really many design choices in which you do want to be kind of haphazard like this. You do want to keep things very neat, very tight together. And that's the thing about healthcare, right? Is that you want to do it in a way that makes you feel professional, that makes you look professional. Patients usually garner more respect for you when it's consistent. And then perspective. This is another one that you may not be dealing with as much, but if you're doing different elements and the better you get at Canva and using different things, having perspective may help you kind of build or promote different ideas. You know, if you have something that's very plain and boring all the time, that's very flat, it's not going to engage patients as much. But if you have something that kind of pops out at you, it's going to be a little bit more engaging, more fun and pleasant to look at. So now we're going to go into color. Did anybody have any questions about like visual hierarchy, kind of different element patterns? Am I going too fast for anyone? Please tell me if I need to slow down.
I don't know what those words mean, Anya.
Which ones?
Like visual hierarchy.
Oh, you want to go back? Okay. Let's go back.
Oh wait, no, you're fine. Never mind. I just wanted like a brief explanation. You're good.
Okay, this is brief. So visual hierarchy, again, is the principle of arranging elements to show their order of importance. So going back to the slide, which is, I think, great that you asked, you want to kind of look at what your eyes pop out first. So Kimberly said she looked at the orange first. What was the next thing that you noticed, Kimberly, if you don't mind sharing?
The wording.
The wording. So this is a bolded text, which we will be going over later. And so the orange, I would say, kind of leads you over here. This, naturally, we would want to read what it's about. Or if you prefer to kind of do other things, I have noticed that students have a tendency to look at other information before getting into the heavy information, only because it's kind of like procrastination, right? You don't necessarily want to be in the class right now. You don't want to be looking at it. So you may look up here first before you get down to this very dense information. So I'm going to pause my share real quick and just go back to our other page. Okay. So color. Color, very fun, very exciting. It can explain a lot of emotion. It can express a lot of different meaning depending on what you're doing. And it, again, provides contrast. It helps accentuate images or text. This is one way to look very concise very quickly. Cohesive very quickly, is if your color is consistent throughout a presentation, beautiful. Okay. So the first thing is to use a color palette. I always like to give the example. I was in a branding class a while ago. Branding is very important for hospitals and, well, any healthcare facility, really. Branding establishes what you're about. It establishes what kind of mood you give off, what your kind of ideals and virtues are for the company. So usually companies will stick to 2 to 4 colors. I know it says 3 to 4 here, but really 2 to 4 colors. And that's because we use the 70-20-10 rule. So does anybody want to give a shot of what the 70-20-10 rule is? Okay, so the 70-20 rule, the 70-20-10 rule, it's going to be how you use the color to differentiate. So for my 70, it's going to be the background. It's this light gray color. And you usually want to use a lighter color for the 70 rule, just because it's a lot lighter on the eyes. It's kind of easier to look at, and it's better to accentuate with darker color. So then my 20 rule is going to be this dark color. It's going to be a lot more pleasant to look at in contrast to this orange. So if like all of this wording was orange, it might be a bit much for people. So it's a very neutral color. It helps. And then this orange just kind of gives a pop of color. It allows you to look at something that feels very cohesive. It's a little bit more fun, but still maintaining its professionalism. Color systems. This is something I love to talk to students about, only because it helps when you actually go into a job. If your boss ever asks you, hey, I want you to make me a website and print something, those are going to be 2 very different things in terms of color. For a Pantone matching system, this is mainly for printing, but it's also for the colors on your walls. You've probably seen in Home Depot or Lowe's Pantone colors. It's very real to life. It's going to be very contrasturally similar. CMYK, this is going to be for printing specifically. Red, green, blue is for any on-screen. That's kind of like a broad version, but then hex values are going to be specifically for websites, video game design, all of that. So if you've ever had a time that you are looking at something, maybe you made some advertisement for a class and you're looking at it and you're like, wow, I printed this, it looks so dull, but on screen, it looks amazing. That's because it's trying to go from a hex or an RGB to a CMYK, and it doesn't always translate the same way. So you want to make sure whatever system you're using, understand that if it only allows for a hexadecimal, it's going to be a little bit more dull once it translates to CMYK. But if you've ever been like, wow, maybe that's a really good printer, it may not always be the printer that you're working with. It could simply be that the program they were using allows for CMYK translation. So color basics. Color, great way, like I said, to contrast, add texture, and opacity is a great way to not make things feel as dense. So for contrasting, what I like to say for contrasting is that it helps a lot, especially if you have statistics. So for contrasting, you can have some information in these bubbles, but then maybe this is like a bad statistic or something that you want to pop out. But for this, if you just have a lot of the same informational elements, this can get very repetitive and boring. You're going to want something to contrast. And like I said, it's better to use color to contrast than it is to use a different shape or element, only because then it breaks kind of the flow of everything. It doesn't look as cohesive. Texture, like I said, this is going to be a lot more for engagement with patients or any audience that you're aiming for. This is a very flat image. It's almost like a silhouette that you'd use as a background, but this provides different things. Maybe if these had, what's the term? If these had animations to it, you could have it like a slide, it could shuffle. It just adds a lot more visual imagery than this does. Opacity. So what I was discussing, this again is not as flat as an image as the previous slide, but it does take up a lot of space, or it feels very heavy. But when you're looking at opacity, opacity is naturally a lot lighter. It's not going to be as informationally dense. You can get a lot more in design-wise without it feeling as cramped as this. So if you had this, let's say, just in a corner, it's a design element, it's not going to feel as heavy or crowded as just randomly adding this all over your page. Fonts. Fonts are so important. I have taken an actual class that only covered one font, and it was Helvetica. It was the importance of Helvetica. I didn't take this class in college, but I took it in high school. When you're doing fonts, and this is a very tense thing to say, but it is contested a lot, only limit yourself to like 2 fonts. Don't use any more fonts than this in your presentations. And you may say, why, Anya? You can do a lot with fonts. You can italicize them, you can bold them, you can do all caps like it is in the corner here. These are all the same fonts, but they do something different. This is smaller but capped. This is going to be what my title page is, or it's going to be kind of telling you what information is going to be on this. This is the main thing we're talking about. This is the question we're asking. It's doing a lot of things without feeling too out of place. It's keeping it very clean. And you keep hearing me say that. It's clean, it's cohesive, it's efficient. When you're looking at presentations, and this is very important to know, you want to reuse similar design elements. You don't want to be all over the place. Even if your design is all over the place, like it's meant to be, keep it the same. Maybe you have a bunch of little and big circles all over the place. Make sure that you have those little and big circles on every single thing, because keeping the aesthetic the same is going to be much more impactful than you only having it on like one slide, maybe 2. I like to say 2 is a choice, 1 is a mistake, 2 is a choice. So for font basics, We're going to look at different combinations of fonts. Kerning. Kerning is probably not something that you've heard before, but it's really important in visual design. Typographic hierarchy. When do you use what font where? Leading also may not be a term, but it's a little bit more known than kerning is. And then different effects you can use. I know that PowerPoint or any Microsoft thing specifically has different arts you can do for lettering, and then accessibility in fonts. So combinations. This is specifically discussing like decorative fonts. So you don't want to have decorative fonts for everything. It feels very heavy. It may be what you're going for, but it's a lot harder to keep consistent than it is this contrast. So you may have this as your heading, very nice looking. It's different than everything else. But then when you have dense information, like we're talking paragraphs of information, it's better to have a sans serif font. Does anybody know what sans serif is? Okay, so sans serif means without decoration, basically. So it's not going to have these little embellishments at the top. It's very generic, but generic can be good when you have lots of information. Oh, are there any questions, by the way? I know I'm kind of going fast. I apologize. Okay, we're doing good. Awesome. So for typographic hierarchy, you can do this in several ways, and I've demonstrated that for you. Having things be different sizes help a lot. Having things be bolded compared to non-bolded, also helpful. If you keep everything the same and just use spacing to differentiate, it's going to be very monotonous to look at. And I think when you have professors that don't really understand how to make effective presentations, you get very bored. It's not fun to look at. You're going to be like, why am I in this class? We're not doing anything. We're just reading off slides. It's going to be much more engaging to have different elements that you can look at. And so you can have a decorative font for your heading. I wouldn't suggest having a decorative font for body specifically, but subheading, it really depends on the brand you're going for, but it's better to have decorative and then sans serif. Effects. Don't be scared to make it a little fancier. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to use fancy fonts all of the time. You can use a simple font and just add these cool effects to it. Have an outline, have a drop shadow. We don't go over it, but drop shadows are actually very interesting. Drop shadows help kind of bounce images off pages. Sometimes they can be a little corny and they don't look that great, but when done correctly, they can just make it pop enough that you're like, oh, this is interesting. It probably would draw you first when you're looking at a presentation. Kerning. So kerning, fun fact, is the spacing in between letters, sorry. Lettering is actually the spacing in between words, but kerning is going to be in between your letters. Very rarely will you adjust your kerning. Some people I know, like if you've seen Instagrams or other social media posts, people will like specifically space letters, like they will add a space in between letters. That's one way to do it. There are most programs do have a way that you can actually just use a little slide scale and it will naturally make it bigger or smaller. Again, you're not usually going to adjust this. Most fonts come with a natural kerning. But it's always good to know. Maybe you want it more spaced. Maybe you want it denser. It really depends. Just make sure that it's legible. Leading. So this is what I was talking about. Leading is specifically, it is not the same as like double spaced or anything. Leading specifically is going to be, it can be like in between words as well. But it was easier to show you this way. But yeah, so biggest rule of thumb is just to keep it legible. Don't make it too heavy. This is actually kind of too much, I would say. Keep it consistent. But if it's taking up too much space, you can make it a little smaller. Accessibility. Remember that not everyone is the same as you. And I think this trips a lot of people up. What may look good to you may not be legible for someone else. Make sure that you use fonts that are fairly easy to read. They have a normal kerning. They're naturally spaced. This has a very close kerning. So you can see like this spacing here is a lot better than this waviness is, because it's confusing for some people. It can be kind of too much together. And it just confuses people. Don't be that person that's purposefully mean and like be like, I can read it. Not everyone can. So now we're going to apply these elements specifically to just like a made up small PowerPoint that I did. So first thing, you can add animations. I think that's fun. So for this one, this is what I like to call a mixed slide. A mixed slide means that you have a photo that takes up, I would say, at least 40% of the page. And then you have information discussing the photo, or this is a supplemental element. It just kind of helps draw in what everyone's talking about. This is also going to be a mixed slide, but it's going to be more photo heavy. This doesn't have a whole lot of information. It still has a decorative element to it. This can just be something maybe your professor's like, hey, I want examples of what you just discussed. So for example, views of space. We were talking about, let me go back. We were talking about interplanetary space, so different kinds of spaces. So then I would say, okay, in a presentation, naturally, I want to look at examples of that. I want to look at what all of these may look. So this is on Earth looking at space, but this is space looking at Earth. So this is going to be a very informationally heavy slide. And how I transition it is actually pertinent to when doing presentations. Because this is a timeline, it makes sense to go in order. You're going to be bringing up information at different times. You're going to be going through. It's going to be elements that kind of go in a line. But bringing this out, some people can be very overwhelmed by the information. They don't know where to look first. Having your title here is very important, and then just having information that is consequential and goes in order. And that was kind of the end that I had, but I would like to go over a few more elements since we do have a decent amount of time. But before that, we'll just call this a break then. Would anybody like to talk about the advisory board survey? Any board members?
Yes, I'll talk about it.
Perfect, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kimberly Gonzalez. I'm the Vice President of the Healthcare Administration Student Forum and UPD, or Upsilon Phi Delta. So this advisory board survey is going to be really important for these upcoming semesters. So if you're a sophomore or a junior, or even a senior, you can influence how our department and a major is run within the next few months. So this survey will really help the advisory board make decisions on how to make this program better for us. So it is completely anonymous. You can answer a few questions or all of them. It's totally up to you. It really is a place for you to vent, to give some compliments, even if you like some things about the program and you think they're doing well. But it's just to get a better idea of how the students are feeling. So we really appreciate if you guys take the time. It does not take longer than 5 minutes. Take the time to just take the survey, because it will make a difference in how this major is run. And our officers and our presidents and VP, me, will be presenting the presentation later this semester. So it will be implemented and it will be discussed relatively soon. So we appreciate any form of comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kimmy. So
one little thing, let me just add to that, Anya.
yeah, no problem.
So just to emphasize, it is anonymous. So whatever you want to say, good or bad, we're not going to say so-and-so said this. We'll just be brief. We'll just compile the information that you guys give us and present it. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay. And then if everyone wants to, we do have our QR code up. If you're not already on our socials or Discord, and you would like to get reminders about things that aren't through BeachSync, this would be really beneficial for you to join. And then are there any pertinent questions before I move on? I'm going to go back to Canva, so we can go over a lot more, but does anybody have questions? Anything they'd like to go over? Anything they want me to go back to? I know I went pretty fast. But these are just really good, I think, elements to know.
Will they have access to this PowerPoint after the presentation, Anya?
Yes, I can totally share that out.
Gotcha, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? So on PowerPoint specifically, I can talk about transitions, animations. Does anybody want to learn more about that? You can just raise your hand on Zoom. You don't have to say anything. If that's of interest to anyone to look at. Matthew? Awesome. Yeah. So if you don't mind sharing, was there a specific slide that you liked the transition or animation of?
I'd say there wasn't a specific slide. It's just like tips on how to do like the overall animations with the slides.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So let me make this smaller for y'all. Oops. Where's my, there you go. Okay. So going back to all of the slides. So each slide, if you notice, has this star. That means that there's a transition to it. And when you're doing transitions, I would suggest not to make it too flashy. So let's look at this one. So you'll go over to this tab and it'll be transition. So I have push for most of them unless they were the same contextual elements. So for this one specifically, if you want to preview it, that's going to be push. But because these are talking about very similar things, I'm going to have morph, and morph takes the elements that are almost the same and just translates it to the next slide. And it makes it very clean. Oh, in the chat. I'm not sure where we'll be posting them. Probably the Discord, Eric, is that correct?
Yes, they'll be available on Discord, all of our social. It'll be available.
Okay, perfect. So that's what I like to do when I have elements that are very similar. That's why for a lot of these, okay, so this one says morph specifically because it does it from the slide before. So sorry, this one says push. So when you preview it, it's because it goes onto this thing. So it's kind of like when you look at entrance animations, it's going to be what it was the slide before to how it gets here. So for this one, it's going to be morph because the elements on the previous slide are similar. So that's why I do that. It looks very clean. I personally love using morph just because I think it impresses a lot of professors if you just do this. And it's super simple to use. But this is another reason that I say to stay consistent in your slides. Some people don't like being this repetitive in their slides, but technically it looks nice. You can translate it very well. You can segue very well. So it makes it more effective when you can just kind of segue into the next thing, but you're still talking about different something else. So then going to animation specifically, let's go to, I know I did one for this. So this one, all of these numbers are the order in which it will animate. So if you look at your animation pane here, it'll tell you on the side. And if we preview it, it'll drop. So for this one, I know all of these elements. And for those of you that aren't really familiar with groupings, when you select an element, so if I just select this little piece, this is going to be its own element. So let me Command C here. Oops. When you are selecting multiple elements that you want to move at the same time, you're going to select one, hold Shift, and then press another element. And that's how you're going to get all of these to be at number 1. So like when I selected these, I went here, and then they all, let me highlight one. And then it'll have different panes you want to look for. For this one specifically, this is I don't remember what it's called, but it's like when you're in the middle of a slide and you don't want it to exit. So an entrance one is you move to the slide, you want something to pop up. You want it to be visually appealing. You're like, ooh, that makes it look a little fancier. This is like during your slide, if you want to, oh, I think these are called emphasizing effects, something like that. It has something to do with emphasizing. So these are going to be like if you're in your thing. So let's see. So if you want to draw attention to something else, maybe someone's zoning out on your presentation and you're like, hey, I want to hit this point, you can add a little effect and people will look at it. And then exit effects are what this one was. So that is an entrance effect. This is an exit effect. And then it goes here. So it previews. That's going to be an entrance effect. Animation's super fun to play around with. Again, don't consistently, which is going to go against what I said, but don't consistently be too loud with your animations. Don't have it where it's like bursting every time, where it like just takes over the page and then closes again, because that's going to be overwhelming for a lot of viewers, and it's realistically not that professional looking. So like for this one, this is a little bit more fun. It's about space. The bouncy ball is just going to be a little bit more if you have like a class presentation. That's another thing. Knowing your audience is going to help a lot. If you're presenting to a CEO, they may not want a bouncy ball on their meeting. It really depends. You have to know your audience. For this one, this is a mixture of transitions and animations. So the animations here, I wanted to bring this information up and then this one leaves when it goes. So it kind of has a nice contrasting effect. This portion comes up when we talk about it and then this one leaves. It just gives a little bit more contrast and emphasizing when you're moving on to your next slide. And then this one didn't really have a transition, but it did have animation. So again, this is the grouping. You can do one of two ways. You can highlight things. Well, I can't now because it's already an animation. But selecting something, pressing shift and holding down and selecting something else will allow it to group at the same time. And if you're ever unsure of what everything is, so this click means this will start this sequence when you click it. So to preview, this is doing it automatically for me, but you see how it groups on the side? Okay, I'll do it again. It's going to play all of these at the same time. And it means whenever I click, those elements are going to start animating. Yeah, so that's kind of the difference between transitions and animations. If you've seen on TikTok, there are some people that like make really impressive presentations just because they understand how to use transitions and animations. And it really helps keep everything cohesive because they usually have one element that will stay on the page. And then they'll translate to another element that stays on the page to go into their next slide. And it's really impressive looking and it makes everything very clean. So I hope that kind of helped Matthew, if that's kind of what you were looking for. Awesome. Okay, so then I'm going to go back to Canva. So I'm going to stop my share real quick. Okay. So Canva, again, is a free site that is, I think, super beneficial. Some people look down on it because, you know, designer purists are going to say, why don't you learn how to do PowerPoint? I know how to do PowerPoint too. PowerPoint can be very time consuming and learning it has a much steeper curve than Canva does. So for Canva, I'm actually going to create an entire new file. Let's do another presentation. So I'm going to go over and make an entire new presentation. Does someone want to give me like a theme that we want to work with? So this is going to be us making a presentation from scratch. Anybody want to just throw out a theme? This is improv right now.
ASI?
ASI? Yeah, we can do ASI. So the first thing I want to do, and this is also super important for any of your marketing classes, if you're with Martinez, look at branding. What is their color palette? That's something I'm going to want to focus on first. So Sammy, I know you were on ASI. Do you know your color branding?
Yes, it's yellow, black, and white.
Awesome. So what I'm going to do is say that's going to be our 70-20-10 rule. So ASI is very welcoming. It's very inclusive. We're going to keep white as our neutral background because it's very applicable. The issue is Yellow on white is not accessible. A lot of people can't read it. It hurts your eyes. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up a text. And I'm going to bring up, so elements are where you can find a lot of different things. We're just going to bring up a square. Also, this isn't going to look great right away. This is just an example. So your square, we're going to make black. Okay. Now we're going to go to text. I want this text. Oh, and it's naturally yellow for me. That is a lot more eligible than having this on white. Especially with this kind of open space in the middle, it's not going to be as easy to read. So if we have this is going to be very eye-catching. It's contrast rule. And the thing when you do a presentation, so like, let's add another thing. You can go in between and have the different colors as your primary background. Now, with that being said, let's kind of look, that's like a fun one we can. Okay, so look at how these templates use a lot of the same elements. It's very boxy. So again, when you're looking at a page, they were able to incorporate both boxy, but keeping the circle because this keeps a lot of the same shape for most of the page. You don't have these straight lines except for the background. Where if you had elements that were, like if this was a circle, it wouldn't look as pleasing. It would look a little funny. But this is a little different because it's a logo. Because it's a logo, logos are a lot more, I said logos. Logos are a lot more applicable to different shape styles just because it is what the company is kind of showing. It's their branding. Branding, again, super important for hospitals. If you think of Dignity Health, you know that it's their like little 4-leaf clover type thing. Is that Dignity Health? Yeah. For Providence, you know, it's going to be the little cross. It's green. Those are their branding. It's what's easy to translate. When you see that image, you'll go, oh, Providence, you know what it is. Same thing with the colors. Keeping colors consistent is super important. And some companies I really appreciate, they like to do maybe different color themes each year, but it still has an overarching brand. So going back, let's just, you know what? Let's just like make our own page. So if anybody would like to give me some elements they would like, we're going to be talking about ASI, but what specifically about ASI are we going to be talking about? What elements do we want? Nothing. Okay. So then what we'll do is let's focus on the pyramid. That's what we're known for. So keeping in theme with we're going to keep this white. Let's add using the rule of thirds. This is about a third of the page. So this is building an element. Now let's add some text. I will say I am partial to having blocky letters and then having hollow letters. I just think that looks very nice. But let's change it up a little bit. Let's do this, keep it a little bit more classy. So this, if you naturally see me doing this, it's because I do this for all my presentations. I like to keep spacing the same. This goes back to proximity. I like to keep things very similar because then it looks a lot more cohesive. So let's keep this back. Let's say we want to talk about, don't mind me, ASI. Estimated, I don't remember. I think we're 49ers. So I'm going to say 1949.
Yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Okay. So this kind of keeps it classy, but it feels very small. So maybe I want to add some elements that kind of draw this out a little bit more. It adds some contrast, so not everything is the same size, but it's still pretty small. So what I want to do then is let's go back to elements. I want to add a little border. I want to make something that draws it out in a way that it's not already doing. Again, going back to spacing. So these are kind of the guidelines that I was discussing, right? So it's going to keep things of similar space, and sometimes you don't follow them. Okay, so that's a little bit better. It fills in where there's negative space. And sometimes you want to fill in the negative space so it doesn't look too empty on your thing. So then let's go. Let's say I want to do a pyramid. Oh, that's really big. These are 2 pyramids, but you know, we have a blue pyramid. So let's kind of. Okay, so that's the end of my page. So you see how we're kind of just building in information piece by piece, and it's keeping everything together. So we know that these are the pyramids. Let's add a circle. So, oops, didn't mean to add 2. So let's add a circle, but this is going to blend in, right? So let's say you want to have something right here. This is another thing that's really fun to learn about Canva. You can position things. So if you saw where I went, you can come up here and press position, and you can push things backwards. And if we use maybe an orange, so depending on the yellow you use, like that, when it takes up a lot more space, yellow is a lot more legible than like highlighter yellow. So if we were using like that, that's a little harder for people to read. But if it's a little darker in color, it provides more contrast. So then maybe we're saying, okay, these are going to list people in ASI. So we want to take one of the same elements. We're going to Command C and Command V. And then we're just going to make it a little smaller. Keeping things consistent if we want the yellow. Okay, I think that looks okay. And those are the guidelines. So it's going to be equally spaced everywhere. And then we're going to Command C, Command V. Again, this is keeping things consistent. Maybe I want it down here. So then we'll make it. So you have some space in the middle. Maybe you wanted to write a little text here, but it's keeping things consistent. We're keeping all of the same colors here. We're using them in different ways. This is a very minimalized pattern. So if we wanted to add an image, let's see. This is why I suggest Canva so much. Canva, these are non-copyrighted images. You can just pull one and it's fine. You're not going to be sued for using them. It's okay. So we are Long Beach State. So I know I want to use an image. But because we have this, it's going to be kind of funky if everything's very rounded elements, right? We're not going to want to just throw on thing and be like, there we go. It looks weird. So what we can do is come over to photos. Oops. Now let's go to elements then. Frames, here we are. So we'll go to frames and we're going to look for a rounded thing and we can just drag and drop. There we go. Now it's a rounded element. And now it doesn't feel as weird to use when you're using other rounded elements. So this obviously was very splurge of the moment. If I had much more time, this would be a lot nicer looking and make more sense conceptually. Doing a presentation like this, you're probably like, what the heck is she talking about in this slide? It was just kind of to show you different elements of Canva. But I hope this has been informative of kind of like different design elements to use. Like, so even for this one, I wish that they had a way to enlarge it in a way that's not, so if you press shift and do this, this is what it'll stay like, but there's no third anchoring point. This is also something when you learn PowerPoint. Anchoring points mean that you can move it in different ways. There's only 4 anchoring points at the corner, so it's only going to move to scale. It's not going to be able to morph. So that's another thing. Some elements like this has another anchoring point. You can make this an oval, but this does not have another anchoring point. It's only going to move to scale. Are there any other questions or things that people wanted to go over? Anything you kind of wanted to learn? We have some more time. No? Okay. Then I hope this has been informative, that you at least learned some things that you didn't know before, or if you did know them, then it kind of reinforces everything. Oh, actually, I do want to go over this. You can highlight things And so you don't have to like individually select and hold shift to press everything. So highlighting groups, you can kind of do that. And maybe I'm like, you know what? I want to move this entire section, but I want to move it where it stays the same. You can press group on Canva and then everything just moves all at once and you don't have to do anything else. And then you can ungroup and it's good. Also, I will say for things with multiple anchoring points, pardon me, you can make them smaller and then move it. So sometimes you may be looking at it and you're like, oh, this is way too thick. But if you like move it like this and then move this, it'll thin it out. But if it moves to scale, then like that, it'll make it larger. So I would definitely suggest playing around with different elements. They have a lot of free graphics. So I think because I use the pyramids, it's like you should use, it's something called magic recommendations. It's gonna be like, you should use a camel. You should use Egyptian gods. Like I think that's Anubis, but it's really great. You can get a lot of different aesthetics on. There's a lot of different drawings. For healthcare, they have an entire coronavirus collection, zodiac symbols for all of you that know astrology. So just a lot of different collections. You can also do this thing where it says, you'll press this I, see more like this. So maybe you don't like this pyramid specifically, but you like another pyramid. Also, Pro, you do have to pay for. So would not suggest unless you have the money to do that. But yeah, there's just a lot of great free elements. Some things are changeable. Some elements you can change the color for. So up here, maybe you're like, this is not my brand's color, but I like this image. You can go ahead, add different colors if you want. But some images are not changeable. So just be aware of what you're working with. Yeah, so we only have 5 minutes left. My only word of advice, if there's no questions, just stay consistent, kind of play around with this. Use an element if you're use a template if you're on a time crunch, or if you just don't have the creative inspiration at the moment, that's totally fine. Just use it to your benefit. There's nothing wrong with using with using templates either. I feel like some people are like, it's cop out. I didn't do anything. It's not cop out. It's there for a reason. It's a free tool that you can use. Super helpful. So yeah, if there's no more questions, then have a great evening, everyone. And if you do have questions, please feel free to ask.